That's true.
Hey! Come, look at this!
As the Boeing 727, Flight 305, taxied down the runway, a man sat in seat 18C. He was smartly dressed, with a calm and soft-spoken demeanor that masked the gravity of his intentions. As the plane began its journey, he discreetly handed a folded note to a passing flight attendant, who, distracted by her routine, simply tucked it into her purse without a second thought. The man leaned in slightly, his voice steady and composed as he said, "Miss, you'd better read that note. I have a bomb." The question was, did he really have a bomb? But the bigger mystery lies in what happened after this enigmatic air pirate received the ransom money he demanded. How did the man who would become known as D.B. Cooper vanish without a trace, maintaining his disappearing act for all time? On the afternoon of November 24, 1971, a middle-aged man carrying a briefcase walked into Portland International Airport and purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle, Washington. He identified himself as Dan Cooper. How he came to be known as D.B. Cooper was the result of a communication error, but it's unlikely he was ever really Dan Cooper. Shortly afterward, he boarded Northwest Airlines Flight 305, joining 36 other passengers and a crew of 6. Once aboard, Cooper settled into his seat in the middle of the last row on the right side of the cabin. In true 1970s fashion, he ordered a drink and lit a cigarette. As the flight was cleared for departure, Cooper calmly turned to flight attendant Florence Schaffner and handed her an envelope. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note declaring that he had a bomb. Reluctantly, Schaffner sat down beside him, where she caught a glimpse of what appeared to be 8 sticks of dynamite connected to 2 wires and a battery inside his briefcase. Cooper's demands were straightforward. He wanted $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. Additionally, he insisted that a fuel truck be on standby to refuel the aircraft once they landed in Seattle. Once the flight was airborne, Schaffner went to inform the cockpit crew, while another flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, stayed by Cooper's side. Mucklow, using a telephone in the rear of the cabin, served as the intermediary between Cooper and the rest of the flight crew for the duration of the hijacking. For the next hour and a half, Flight 305 remained in a holding pattern near Seattle while local and federal authorities worked urgently to secure the ransom and the 4 parachutes. Meanwhile, the other passengers were kept in the dark about the true situation and were simply informed that the plane was experiencing mechanical problems. $10,020 bills were collected from a local bank, and the owner of a nearby skydiving school provided the parachutes. Throughout, Cooper remained astonishingly calm, often pointing out landmarks below from the window. Tina Mucklow later remarked, "He seemed rather nice. He was never cruel or nasty. He was thoughtful and calm the entire time." At 5:45 p.m., more than 2 hours past its scheduled arrival time, Flight 305 finally touched down in Seattle. By this time, it was well after sunset, and the aircraft was directed to a remote section of the tarmac. Once the flight came to a stop, the ransom and parachutes were handed over to Mucklow, who then brought them back aboard. In return, Cooper allowed 2 of the flight attendants and all the passengers to disembark. Many of the passengers at this point were still unaware that the flight had been hijacked. With the ransom delivered and only 4 crew members remaining on board, Cooper instructed Mucklow to inform the captain that he wanted to fly to Mexico City. He specified that the plane should fly with the landing gear down, the flaps set at 15 degrees, and at an altitude below 10,000 feet. The cabin lights were to be turned off, and the aft stairway, which opens from the underside of the fuselage, was to remain extended. 2 of Cooper's demands could not be met. The flight configuration he requested did not permit a non-stop journey to Mexico City. Consequently, Cooper suggested a refueling stop in either Phoenix, Yuma, or Sacramento. After some negotiation, they all agreed on Reno, Nevada. Additionally, departing with the ventral staircase extended was not feasible. Cooper agreed to retract the stairs on the condition that Mucklow stayed by his side and demonstrated how to extend them once the plane was airborne. After being grounded for nearly 2 hours due to complications with refueling, Flight 305 was back in the air by 7:36 p.m. Less than 5 minutes after takeoff, Cooper instructed Mucklow to head to the cockpit and made it clear that he was not to be disturbed from that point onward. The last time Mucklow saw Cooper, he was standing in the middle of the aisle, as if preparing to jump. She joined the rest of the crew, locked the cockpit door behind her, her, and approximately 3 hours later, Flight 305 landed safely in Reno. Once the flight came to a stop, the crew carefully ventured into the rear of the cabin, but there was no sign of Cooper or the bomb. The aft stairway, which had been extended mid-flight, was slightly damaged upon landing. It appeared there was only one plausible explanation for the hijacker's disappearance. At some point between Seattle and Reno, Cooper had donned a parachute, descended the stairs, and jumped into the darkness of the night. Once it became clear that Cooper was no longer on board, dozens of FBI agents converged on the aircraft, only to find a disappointing amount of physical evidence. The only items Cooper left behind were a black clip-on tie, 8 cigarette butts, and 2 of the 4 parachutes. In interviews conducted on the night of the hijacking, Cooper was described by the crew and passengers as a white male with brown eyes and dark hair. Based on this description, the FBI created the first of several composite sketches. Before launching a search, however, they needed to determine the exact moment when Cooper had abandoned the aircraft, but that was easier said than done. None of the 4 crew members saw Cooper jump from the plane, nor did the pilots of the 2 fighter jets that had escorted the flight between Seattle and Reno. Given that it was the middle of the night, this lack of sighting was not entirely surprising. However, the flight crew did report something unusual. The last communication with the hijacker took place around 8:05 p.m., when the crew used the intercom to offer assistance, which Cooper declined. Within the next 10 minutes, the crew reported experiencing what they described as an oscillation or vibration of the aircraft. At the time, they suspected this might have been caused by Cooper's jump, and a subsequent recreation of the hijacking supported that conclusion. That addressed the question of when Cooper jumped. But what about the question of where? In fact, Cooper grew so impatient with the slow refueling process in Seattle that he dismissed the captain's request to file a flight plan, simply telling him to get the show on the road. As a result, the captain chose to follow an airway known as Victor 23 without any input from Cooper. By using Victor 23 as a reference, authorities estimated that the most probable location of the flight at the approximate time of the jump was about 40 kilometers north of Portland. At dawn, the FBI launched an extensive search operation, deploying helicopters, airplanes, and ground troops. The challenge was that, even if the estimated bailout point was accurate, pinpointing Cooper's actual landing or drop zone was far more difficult. The loosely defined search area encompassed a vast expanse of mountainous wilderness, obscured by dense forests, making it akin to finding a needle in a haystack. In addition to the challenging terrain, the search was further hampered by low temperatures and inclement weather, which persisted for days. The temperatures in the area were so frigid that many believed Cooper might not have survived. Despite their best efforts, authorities never managed to find any trace of Cooper or the items he had brought with him. By early December, the FBI shifted their focus to the $200,000 ransom. The money had been provided by Seattle First National Bank, which kept a ransom package of $250,000 on hand specifically for such emergencies. As a precaution, the serial numbers of the $10,020 banknotes given to Cooper had been documented in advance. A complete list of the serial numbers was quickly made available to financial institutions, government agencies, and the general public. The intention was to make it as difficult as possible for Cooper to spend the money. Northwest Airlines and several newspapers even offered rewards for anyone who could find a note with a matching serial number. Despite these efforts, no one ever came forward with such a note. Nearly a decade later, in early 1980, a young boy named Brian Ingram was building a campfire on a small beach in southern Washington. While digging in the sand, Ingram uncovered 3 bundles of cash totaling $5,880. Having heard about the infamous hijacking, Ingram's parents turned the severely degraded bundles over to the FBI. The notes were promptly inspected, and indeed, the serial numbers matched those of the ransom. After 9 years, this was the first significant breakthrough in the hijacking case. But rather than solving the case, this discovery made it more complex. The money raised far more questions than it answered, the most significant being how. How did the cash end up so far from the estimated drop zone? The agents speculated that Cooper might have accidentally dropped some of the money, which then fell into the Lewis River. From there, the bundles could have been carried downstream by the Columbia River, eventually washing ashore at Tina Bar, the name of the beach where they were found. The problem with this theory is that the Columbia River flows in the opposite direction. This discrepancy led some, including members of the FBI, to reevaluate the initial assessment of the drop zone. To further complicate matters, sediment from the riverbed was excavated and dumped onto Tina Bar during a dredging operation in 1974. According to one analysis, the money was found above this layer of sediment. If true, this would suggest that the money ended up at Tina Bar sometime after 1974. The most plausible explanation, then, is that Cooper Cooper or someone else intentionally buried the money? Suffice it to say, this remains a mystery within a mystery. Some theories suggest that Cooper might have been a trained military operative because the parachute he chose to take with him was a military-issue parachute. There's also reason to suspect that Cooper had a military background. While the flight was holding near Seattle, Cooper noted that McChord Air Force Base was only 20 minutes away from Seattle-Tacoma Airport. At the time, that was an accurate assessment, which might hint at his familiarity with military operations. In addition to potential military connections, Cooper may have had links to the Central Intelligence Agency. The aircraft he chose to hijack, a Boeing 727, was also used by the CIA to covertly drop agents and supplies during the Vietnam War. It's reasonable to assume that Cooper chose to hijack a Boeing 727 specifically because it offered a relatively safe means of escape. By that time, the FBI had already begun investigating several potential suspects. Among them was a man in Portland with the initials D.B. and the surname Cooper. Although this individual was quickly ruled out as a suspect, a mix-up by the press led to the confusion of the name Dan Cooper with D.B. Cooper, and the rest is history. Nearly half a century has passed since the hijacking, during which thousands of suspects have been questioned and investigated. It has been very challenging for the FBI to reach certainty with so little evidence to work with. The suspects look nothing alike, yet any one of them could be D.B. Cooper. Was Cooper really in his mid-40s, or did he simply look old for his age? Did Cooper really serve in the military? In 2016, the FBI was forced to admit defeat and officially closed the case. Did Cooper survive? That remains a mystery.